guys, in this video I'm going to explain what minor scales are and how they work, and I will also briefly touch on the three forms of the minor scale, and I will offer you some suggestions as to how to go about practicing your minor scales as a pianist when you are first starting out. So in this video we're going to cover minor scales in a sort of theoretical sense so that you can kind of understand some of the theory surrounding the minor scale. It's a little bit more complicated than the major scale. I'm going to leave scale fingerings for another video, and I've already covered key signatures in my Circle of Fifths videos. I did one for the majors and one for the minors, so check those out when you get the chance. All right, let's get into it. So what is the minor scale? To illustrate this, I have drawn out a C major scale using the bass clef here for you. On the bottom, you have the scale degrees, which are the numbers. You have the scale on the staff, and then you have the letters of the scale, right? So in order to understand the minor scale, what you really want to do is you want to think of the major scale, but you want to go to the sixth note of the major scale and basically make that the first note of the scale. Okay? So we are going to go to A, which is the sixth note in C major, and we're going to build a new scale off that note using the same notes. So listen to that real quick. Here's C major. Notice it's happy and uplifting sounding, right? If we go down to the A, here's A, we're going to play those same notes of C major, just from A to A instead, right? Do you notice how the tonality shifted? Do you notice how that last scale sounded more solemn and more serious compared to the happy and uplifting sound of C major? What you just experienced was the minor scale. And so the minor scale and the major scale essentially share all of the same notes. They just have a different starting note. And so that also means that they share the same key signature. So C major has no sharps or flats. A minor has no sharps or flats. So there are two scales or two keys per key signature. There's a major key and there's a minor key. And so there are 12 key signatures, generally speaking. That means there are 24 total keys that we are going to think of, or 24 physical places on the keyboard that you could build a scale off of. 12 majors, 12 minors, right? That's just kind of an introduction to this scale concept. So I'm going to go back to my drawing here, and I'm going to back this down to A. Okay? And so now what you have here is your minor scale. Okay? And all we did was we just declare A, the sixth note of C, we just declare that as our new one. And we build our new scale off of that using the same notes. We get our natural minor scale. That's the natural form of the scale. It's the default version of the scale, the baseline minor, and it's the one that the key signature is written for. So we're going to get into that in just a second. Now, what makes the minor sound sad? It's actually pretty much contained within the first three notes. In the first three notes of the major scale, you have this figure. Right? You have that major third sound between the first note and the third note. Well, right here, that's a minor third. It's a different number of half steps between the two. This is 4 half steps wide. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 3 half steps wide. 1, 2, 3. Okay? And basically, in this scale, this is a whole step, whole step. This is a whole step, half step. So when you move the starting note relative to these same notes of the C major scale, if you move the starting note, basically what happens if you move it to the sixth scale degree is the half step that's already found as part of the scale, it's going to occur sooner in the scale. And it gives you this tonality, right? Instead of this one. So since these two scales share a key signature and they share all of the same notes, they are referred to as relatives of one another. That's an important vocabulary term. These are C major is the relative major of A minor, and A minor is the relative minor of C major. And in order to get from one to the other, you'll basically go to the sixth scale degree of the major, or you'll go to the third scale degree of the minor. Or you can go to the first note of the major and you can go down 3 half steps. So 1, 2, 3, that gets you to your relative minor. And if you're in your relative minor, you can go up 3 half steps to get to your relative major. So this is important, especially when you're trying to figure out the notes of your scale. Like let's say you're in C sharp minor or something like that. Well, the C sharp minor has 4 sharps in it, and E major has 4 sharps in it. And so by this point in your scale study, you probably know E major, but maybe you don't know C sharp minor. Well, it's going to be the same notes as E major, but if you go to E and you descend 3 half steps, you're just going to play that same scale, just like we did for C and A. You're going to do that for E major and C sharp. So that's a little bit of how that works, and that's how that's basically what the relative major and minor concept is. Okay, that's very important to know. So C major and A minor are paired, and E major and C sharp minor are paired, for example. You want to try to remember your pairings because they're going to come up a lot in music. So that's going to be a helpful thing to know. Okay, so this form of the minor scale, the natural form of the minor scale, the form that's like the default, the natural way to express it using the notes of the major scale, right? That's the first form of the scale. There are 2 other forms of the minor scale that we use. And so to understand why we use them, I want to draw your attention to the fact that C major has a half step between its 7th scale degree and its 1st scale degree. Okay? So right under the C, the B is just a step away. And this gives it some pushing power to C, especially when used as part of a harmony. Listen to that. Right? Did you hear that pushing power? So if we do the basically the same notes as C, and we start on an A, the 7th note is G, and G is a whole step away from A. So listen to the pushing power of that. I'm trying to highlight the notes that are moving to one another, right? So in this example, these chords are they don't really sound like, they just sound like 2 adjacent chords. There's not really pushing power from one to the other. And this is because there is not a half step between the 7th scale degree and the 1st scale degree in A minor, or any minor for that regard, because the natural minor doesn't include that component, right? The raised 7th scale degree is what we refer to as a leading tone, and it leads you to your tonic note. So the natural minor lacks a leading tone. And so we can modify the natural minor by adding a leading tone to it. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to go to the 7th scale degree, which in A is going to be G. You're going to raise that by half step. So now we're going to make it a G sharp. And this creates what we call the harmonic form of the scale. So here's what the harmonic minor sounds like. So that's important because a melody that is involving these notes right here has pushing power back to A, and that also includes harmonies that use it as well. Right? Without that, that would sound like this. It just doesn't have the same effect. It doesn't sound classical. It doesn't sound like our typical Western music system, okay? Generally speaking. So, harmonic form of the scale includes a leading tone, and the leading tone that we add to the scale is a modification of the scale, and so this leading tone is going to be thought of as an accidental. It's not part of the key. There's not such thing as the key of something harmonic minor. Harmonic minor is a type of scale, and it's a modification of the regular natural minor scale, and the natural minor scale is the key. It's the minor key, just in scale form, okay? That's really important. The reason I say that is because when you play this scale, right? And you see that black key and you're like, oh, it's got 1 sharp. That scale does have a sharp in it because you're modifying it with an accidental. But that is not a 1 sharp scale. That is a 0 sharp scale in terms of key signature. So when you're remembering your key signature, it's important that you think of A minor as 0 with the G sharp as a modification. That is important. All right, the next scale to talk about, let me go ahead and notate this here on the staff. So that's the harmonic form of the scale is going to look like this. Right? It's going to have a G sharp as an accidental. Okay? The next form of the scale is the melodic minor. And for this scale, we're going to raise the 6th scale degree as well. It's going to sound like this. And then on our way down, we're going to lower those 2 notes, okay? So the melodic minor is actually 2 scales in one, and it includes, in this case, in A minor, it includes the F sharp and the G sharp, which would be the raised 6th and 7th notes in the scale. And so what this does is it allows for any melody that's composed using these notes, it's going to allow that melody to be a lot smoother. The harmonic minor is not particularly smooth because this raised 7th scale degree, while still leaving this note where it is, creates this big jump here of actually 3 half steps. So it's not even part of your 2-2-1, 2-2-1 thing, like with your whole steps and half steps, like the regular major scale, right? We have a basically like a minor third or 3 half steps splitting these notes up. So if you create a melody around that, it's going to sound sort of abrupt, okay? In the melodic form of the scale, this is remedied by having a raised 6th scale degree too. So it makes that smoother compared to the harmonic form of the scale. And the notes are only raised when we are ascending, because when we're ascending, we're usually pushing somewhere, like tonally. And so that's where that smoothness and those leading tones and everything are needed. But when we are descending, we're typically, generally speaking, not trying to push anywhere in particular. And so we will not use the raised notes on the way down. We'll just use the regular form of the scale, or at least that's how it's practiced. That's how it's taught, and that's how it's practiced. Okay, so that's the melodic form. So your 3 forms of your minor are your natural minor, default minor, your harmonic minor, which is the natural minor with a leading tone, raised 7th scale degree, and your melodic minor, which is your natural minor with a raised 6th and 7th going up and lowered 6th and 7th going down. So that's an important takeaway. And I wanted to touch briefly on what this does to the harmonies. So for both the harmonic and melodic form of the scale, if you look at what happens to some of the chords, like for instance the 5 chord in A minor, watch this. I kind of touched on this briefly, but I want to make sure you understand this. So this is a 1 chord in A minor. This is a 5 chord using the natural minor. If we use the harmonic minor instead, or the melodic minor, it's going to raise this note to this note. And it's going to make that 5 chord major. And that's what gives it its pushing power. Okay? So basically, if a piece is in A minor, in order to make it sound normal, you're going to see a lot of G sharps in it. And so this could indicate that either the melodic or the harmonic form of the scale is being utilized. Because that 5 chord is going to be major in both those cases. So that's something else to keep in mind. Okay, so which form of the scale should we actually practice? Let me go ahead and switch to my keyboard view here, okay? Which form of the scale should we practice? I would recommend, as was recommended to me when I first learned, that you practice the harmonic version of the scale. If you have to pick one, you should practice the harmonic form of the scale. And there's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, that harmonic form of the scale includes the harmony needed for the major dominant chord, which is what we need to have the cadential pushing power of a minor key in order to really set it up very solidly. Okay, so the harmonic minor is going to tune your ear more to that, and it's going to include all of the notes of the harmony that we need to make that possible. And then also, generally speaking, the harmonic form of the scale, because of that weird gap here, it's going to push apart your 3rd and your 4th finger, at least with, well, really with almost every fingering layout of the scale. It's going to push some of the fingers apart from one another. If you're dealing with the white key scales, the scales that start on white keys, that means it's going to be your 3rd and your 4th finger on your right hand. Okay, it doesn't really matter so much on your left hand. Let me do this. Right, because your 2nd and 3rd finger, it's easier to spread those apart. But I mean, it still matters, right? You're getting a little bit of a stretch here. You're getting a little bit of a stretch here. So there's a physical stretch that occurs between your 6th and your 7th scale degree in the harmonic form of the minor. And that's going to normalize that sense of stretching, which is frequently encountered in music. And that's a helpful thing also. And the last thing is I was mentioning that the harmonic form of the scale includes that major 5 chord, right? Well, we want to associate G sharp with A minor. We want to build that association. That's an important thing. That's the last reason why you probably want to practice your harmonic minors, is even though you think of A minor as a 0 sharps and flats scale, you still want to associate it with G sharps, because if a composer really is in A minor, you're going to typically see G sharps. It would be unusual and relatively uncommon for you to have a piece in A minor that doesn't have G sharps in it. Now we're only going to use the G sharps when we're trying to reinforce the key, which is like right in the beginning or at the end of a phrase or something like that. But elsewhere, you're not going to need that sharp, so you'll experience the natural form of the minor elsewhere. So anyway, that's a little bit about how that fits into music, and that's why I recommend that you practice the harmonic minor form of the scale. All right, so here's some tips for dealing with and practicing these scales, okay? The first tip is to know your key signature. Definitely know your key signature. So for example, let's change keys here. Let's go to E major. E major and C sharp minor. So E major and C sharp minor share a key signature of 4 sharps, okay? That's basically how that works. Now, when you're practicing your harmonic form of the scale, you still need to know that the 4 sharps, F, C, G, and D, are the default way that the scale is built. But then when we practice the harmonic form of the scale, you're going to have a B sharp in it, okay? That's the accidental. The B sharp is the accidental. So C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B sharp for the harmonic, but not for the natural. So that's an accidental, and C sharp, right? You got to know your key signature in order to know what to expect with that scale, especially when you're dealing with the black key scales. It gets complicated. You can do it by feeling, and the harmonic minor is a really distinct feeling. It's pretty easy to memorize, but that being said, that's only one of the forms of memory, and that's not really going to be reliable enough, especially at a high level. You want to know your scales theoretically and physically and visually, and basically as many ways as you can know them, okay? That's the first tip. Know your key signature. Second tip is, even though I recommend that you practice your harmonic minor scale as the main scale that you practice for the minors, especially when you're learning them, you might wish to practice the natural form of the scale first. So for example, right, I'm using all of the notes of E major, right? I'm using those notes of E major to build my sense of tonality and get a sense of which notes belong to C sharp minor, right, by default. And then what I'll do is I'm going to raise that 7th scale degree and directly compare the two. Okay, when you directly compare the two, you can get a sense of the default way of experiencing the key and what the harmonic minor does to the key, and that helps you learn the scale, in my opinion. I found that I didn't have to do this when I was first learning my scales. I didn't really have to do this for most keys, but some of them I did. And some of my students feel the need to do that, so that's totally a thing you can do, is practice your natural first and then switch to the harmonic minor the second that you can conceptualize it. Okay, the next tip here I have is practice the left hand up and down, and then practice down and up. Basically, what this is saying is to vary the way that you are starting your scales and make sure you're doing like different directions in your playing. And so that is to help you learn your scale better. So this is, to illustrate this, I generally have my students practice at the very least the parallel and contrary form of the scale. But when they're first learning their scales, I recommend they practice it in 4 directions. So parallel scale from the bottom, parallel scale from the top, contrary scale from the inner position, contrary scale from the outer position. So it's 4 variations of the same scale. And that's going to make you know your scale way better. It's of course going to be harder, it's going to be a little bit more work, but the scale is going to be more dependable under pressure, and therefore any piece that uses the scale is going to be more dependable as well. So to illustrate this, I'm going to play the C sharp minor scale again, harmonic minor. Now, we also want to be able to go from the top of the scale down. And then we want to be able to go from the inner position to the outer position. To be able to go from the outer position to the inner position. And a lot of what this comes down to is how well does your left hand know how to descend from the top? Because when you first learn the scale, you're probably going to start with your right hand. You're probably going to start on the bottom of the scale, and you're going to ascend to the top and then back down, right? And so you're not going to really have any trouble with that, I think, if you can figure out your notes and fingerings and everything. But on the left hand, you're also going to do the same thing. You're going to start from the bottom, logically, and you would go to the top and then back to the bottom. So that means when you first attempt to put your hands together for contrary motion, you're not going to know what to do around here because you don't remember how it started. So in order to remedy that, play the left hand from the bottom and pay close attention to how it's laid out, like right here. Okay? And then see if you can, and remember this, the last finger, which will be 2 in this case, okay? Can you start from there? Right? So if you learn your scale that way as well, then this is going to be a lot easier. And of course, you can do the same thing for the right hand. That's going to make this part of the scale easier as well. So practice varying your scales in the directions. Practice in the 4 directions if you find a scale particularly challenging. It's way better than just doing it in parallel form. You might think, oh, but it's so much easier. Just do it in parallel form. I don't have all this extra work to do. Except for if your piece if your piece doesn't enter the scale in exactly the manner that you've practiced it, it's almost as if you won't know the scale. And so at least this is going to help set you up for more variations that you're actually going to find in actual music. So anyway, I feel like that's a really important tip. And then the last tip, an obvious tip, is just don't go so fast. Go at the speed of no mistakes. I know it's a cliche, but it's totally true. Like, people say it for a reason. The speed that you can get the scale correct is the speed that you go. You don't go above that. If you go above that, it's going to take you a lot of attempts to figure it out. You'll have a lot of wrong attempts and then a few right ones, and that's not going to set you up for a reliable scale playing experience, okay? So go at the speed that you can very confidently and easily play it correctly. It's not going to improve until you find yourself in that situation. And let me think if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. Oh, one way to get your speed into a reasonable place is to think more than one pulse per note. You could think of each note in the scale as a half note or a whole note. For example, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You can slow it down. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, right? You can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and so on. One of my professors would say, you don't know it unless you know it slow. He's referring to music and scales in this case. And so what he means by this is that if you try to just speed through the scale, yes, your muscle memory might take care of you, especially if you've played it before. But still, it's not going to be totally reliable because that's just one form of memory. If you know it really slow, you have to do all of the uncomfortable calculations of how to move in between all of the notes. You're going to know your scale a lot better anyway. So I like to think of scales as theoretical before they're technical. And what I mean by that is that you need to learn the theory and the notes and the key signatures and all of the particulars surrounding the way that the scale is built before you can rip through a scale really fast. Okay, so it's a theory exercise before it's a technical exercise, in my opinion. All right, that pretty much concludes my presentation on minor scales. And I know there's a lot to deal with. There's a lot of information surrounding minor scales. So hopefully this video was illuminating for you. If you haven't watched the Circle of Fifths videos, you should totally watch those. And I wish you luck in your scale practice. And I'll see you in the next video.